The guy on this side is me. The guy on the other side isn't me. But if things would have worked out a little bit differently, it could have been, because I was born into an Orthodox Jewish family. During my adolescence, I started to feel very uncomfortable with the idea that I had to follow precepts, accept beliefs, just because some authority said I had to. And even the loyalty to my tribe, to my religion, to my family, didn't feel enough of a reason to renounce the idea of freedom of mind. I think I've been very lucky because my family was willing to accept my choice, even though it was somewhat painful for them. And I, as opposed to many others who went on a similar journey, didn't have to choose between my freedom and my family's love. And yet, I had to pay a price for that freedom anyway. Because my hunch, by the way, is that many of you at some point will feel that my story isn't that different from yours. And you will also recognize that once you broke out of earlier loyalties, you also paid the price of losing a little bit of the safety, tribal belonging, of truths, of certainties that you had given up on. This talk is about how I found out that I did belong to another tribe, and that how I regained a sense of mission that is very important in my life today, and I guess, again, important in your lives as well. Well, at the beginning, I thought that my new tribe was Jewish neurotic males. And that actually put me into very good company, and I felt fairly proud, but rather soon found out that there were also some problems with that, particularly when I read and heard Woody Allen's fabulous summary of the Jewish neurotics male's credo. My only problem is that I'm not somebody else. So he tried psychoanalysis to become a little bit happier. When he was asked after 28 years of analysis what it had done for him, he said, not a single day goes by in which I don't think about suicide. So they asked him once again 80 years later at age 36, and then his answer was, well, probably I didn't need all these years of analysis to begin with. Now, incidentally, psychoanalysis was invented by another Jewish neurotic male who made a lot of people feel very uncomfortable by telling them that they really wanted to sleep with their mothers and kill their father. Now, I'm not sure whether that's true, but I can tell you for sure that he helped me a lot. You see, I'm an attention deficit disorder. And I, as my wife can attest without doubt, am completely incapable of keeping anything in order, including my own writing desk. So think about it. For a good Jewish boy, I should have been either a lawyer or a doctor, but that would never have made a living with it because I'm simply not able to keep neat order. So psychoanalysis kind of worked out pretty nice for me, so I'm very grateful to Freud for that. To become a little bit more serious, see, most of Freud's specific theories have turned out to be wrong. I still think that his contribution to our culture was phenomenal, and I want to focus on an aspect that is a little bit less known to most people. When Freud began to write, the in thing in psychology and biology was to claim that different races had different psyches, different psychologies, and different biologies. Particularly, a lot of races had inferior biologies and psyches. What many people are not aware of is that one of Freud's goals was to show that, in the end, all humans have the same biologically determined unconscious, and we belong to one race. This was a very important message, the message that there is a universal human nature, but it wasn't always liked. Let me move one step further in my own voyage of discovery. I at some point found out that my new tribe wasn't just Jewish male neurotics, but there were actually a lot of women in them. And they didn't have to be Jewish for me to feel this sense of belonging, and actually not even white. This is Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was born 42 years ago in Somalia to a Muslim family. And at age 5, she was genitally mutilated. She managed to break away in late adolescence, and since early adulthood, she has been fighting for the rights of women anywhere, everywhere on this globe, but particularly into Islam, into which she had been born. You might expect that that's a wonderful message. It's a message that half of humanity should have the same rights as the other one. And yet, it turns out that this message, again, is not always welcomed. Ayaan Hirsi has been living under death threats for the last 8 years since she wrote the script for a documentary about the status of women in Islam. And see, this is the point where, as a psychologist, I'm beginning to ask the question, why are messages of universal laws, universal natural laws, universal values, universal rights, why are they so often met with resistance? Actually, notice that this thing, of course, didn't start in the 20th century. You see, in 1632, Galileo Galilei was tried by the Catholic Church for arguing that the Earth is not at the center of the universe. And he had to recant publicly in order to avoid a horrible fate. 24 years later, Baruch Spinoza, born into a Portuguese family in Amsterdam, had come to the conclusion that there was basically only one set of law that applied to everything on this earth, including to human nature. That all texts can and need to be interpreted in the same way, with the same historical method, and that includes the Bible. It wasn't very well accepted. At age 23, he was excommunicated by the Amsterdam Jewish community. He was never to see any of his childhood friends or his family again. He did become one of the founding philosophers of modernity in general and modern science in particular. Charles Darwin was a little bit luckier. He wasn't excommunicated, but his writings were put on the index of the Catholic Church, meaning you shouldn't read those. What did he say? He said that human beings are basically on a continuum with the rest of biological life. So once again, let me ask the question, what about the message of Galileo, Spinoza, Darwin, Freud, and Ayaan Hirsi makes it difficult to accept? Fortunately, my colleagues in existential psychology have started a research project in the last 20, 25 years that is beginning to yield answers. You see, we all need worldviews. We all need a structure that provides us with meaning, that tells us what is valuable, and that tells us how to live our lives, and to tell us when we live meaningful lives. All of us, including all of us in this room, feel very bad, attacked, and insecure when our worldviews are criticized or under attack. But it does turn out that there are basically two forms of reactions to such threat. There's one type of worldview that I call closed worldviews, based on the idea that there is one authority that must not be questioned, that at some point told us the one truth that will never change and doesn't need to change. And of course, if that's what you believe about your worldview, any change, the reality that there are other worldviews that are often quite successful, can evoke very difficult reaction, in fact, often very violent reactions. On this side, we have Baruch Goldstein, the Brooklyn-born Jewish physician who moved to the West Bank and in 1949 killed 29 Muslims who were praying in the tombs of the patriarchs near Hebron. The other guy is Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is to this day one of the leaders of Al-Qaeda. What is so fascinating and so unsettling is that both these men were trained as physicians. So it doesn't matter that you have knowledge. Unfortunately, it sometimes isn't even enough that you were trained as a physician that was supposed to save lives. as long as you have a closed worldview, that feels completely threatened when it is criticized. Not all religions and not all religious human beings need to react that way. The Dalai Lama, a Buddhist, a very deeply believing Buddhist, has been in a very intense dialogue with science for decades. Chief Rabbi of Britain, Jonathan Sacks, has been in a very intense, very fruitful dialogue with other cultures, with science, and has contributed a lot to such dialogue. Open worldviews are defined by the profound insight that human worldviews are in the end human creations. That there are attempts to deal with the boat and the fate that we all sit in. To be finite human beings, that we will all die living in an infinite universe and still need meaning. The moment we understand that, our worldviews open up. We become a little bit more tolerant towards the need for change, towards the fluidity that is needed. I think that most people who have broken out of a closed worldview and have moved out become deeply identified with and deeply believe in the necessity for open worldviews. And let me, for the sake of this talk, call all those of us who believe that world citizens. What can we do in order to open up worldviews everywhere? What you see in this slide is Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict, in a very ongoing dialogue that he has with one of the greatest living Enlightenment philosophers, Jürgen Habermas. Let me make it clear, I very deeply disagree with many of the things that Pope Benedict thinks, but he can be talked to. The dialogue is there, and it is of absolute necessity. I've actually been trying for years to do that within my own tribe of origin. You remember the caricature that I showed you at the beginning? It's actually part of a caricature that was made to promote an ongoing TV program called The Rabbi and the Professor, in which I argue about Israeli politics, Jewish identity, with National Religious Rabbi Uri Sherki. As I guess you can probably guess from the caricature, I'm not always nice there. I'm actually often quite angry. But we manage to talk. Not only don't we hit each other, we actually like each other personally a lot, even though he probably thinks that I'm as wrong as I think that he is, with the slight difference, of course, that I'm right and that he's wrong. Here we come to a very important point. You see, world citizens have a tendency to hope that everything will end up very harmonious. In the end, we will just, end up agreeing with each other and feel that we have a deep common denominator. It will not always be like that. Salman Rushdie, a great novelist, in 1988 published one of his novels called The Satanic Verses. In it, he used one of the most important tools of open worldviews, the ability to satirize ourselves, to be ironic towards ourselves, to see ourselves from funny, unexpected angles. And one of the things he did was to satirize a lot of elements of Islam. That wasn't taken very well. Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa, a religious command, that Salman Rushdie and everybody involved in publishing or disseminating this novel had to be killed. And you know what? There were many, many people who took that seriously. The Japanese translator of the book was killed. The Norwegian publisher barely survived an attack on his life. In the end, more than 30 people died because of the violence engendered by this fatwa. And now comes the really bad point. You know what happened? Many of Rushdie's fellow writers suddenly said he shouldn't have written that book. It was insensitive. He should have known that it created problems. I'm all in favor of dialogue. I'm all in favor of harmony. I do whatever I can to increase it where I can. But we have to know that there are moments where if you're not going to stand up for the core values that we stand for, including the freedom of expression that doesn't generate hate and doesn't preach violence, neither of which Salman Rushdie did. If we back down, it's the beginning of the end of our World Citizenship Project. That is also what Salman Rushdie's very good friend, Christopher Hitchens, said. He writes in his autobiography that when he heard about the fatwa, he was completely mobilized. He says it was about, suddenly there was a cause that involved everything that I loved and everything that I hated. In the hate column, he says, there is dictatorship, stupidity, demagogy, censorship, bullying, and intimidation. In the love column, literature, irony, humor, the individual, and the defense of free expression. I guess that's one of the better short summaries of the fighting spirit that we need as world citizens if we know that there will be moments where we'll have to stand up for what we're for. Christopher Hitchens used his ferocious intellect, his prodigious memory, his enormous wit, and the beauty of his language to stand up for those values. His untimely death last year has robbed us of one of our greatest proponents, but I hope he will continue to inspire many, and I would like to dedicate this talk to his memory. Thank you very much.